Welcome to our workshop today with the topic of the Dindigul Agreement, a worker-centered and enforceable supply chain agreement to prevent gender-based violence and harassment, with Ashley Saxby, Gender Justice Program Coordinator and Southeast Asian Coordinator, and her colleague, Aparna. They both come from Asian Floor Wage in Alliance. My name is Hian. I'm online tutor at the Global Labor University Online Academy, and this workshop is a discussion further from the lectures in the chapter 3 and 4 of our MOOC, Subordination and Discrimination in the Global Supply Chain, Recognizing Diversity and Building Unity. I would like to give a notice to every audience today that the workshop will be recorded. We would kindly ask everybody to keep their camera on so we can have a better reaction. And if you have a problem with being recorded, you can put the camera off. And during the workshop, we will have a Q&A session, so feel free to raise your hand or post the questions on the chat box. We will pick up the question from everyone. And in this 1 hour workshop, we will have 10 minutes of keynote speak from Ashley and Aparna. And then we will have some discussion rounds and the floor will be open at the last 10-15 minutes for everyone to give their thoughts and exchange or question they may have. Let me introduce our guest speaker today, Ashley Saxby and Aparna. They have been deeply involved in the process of prevention, signing, and also implementation of the Dindigul Agreement. Let us welcome both of you. And thank you very much for the time to join us today. We have quite lots of registration audience today who are very interested in this topic. Ashley and Aparna, could you please give us a brief review of the Dindigul Agreement to end gender-based violence and harassment, and the scopes, the components, and the roles of Asian Floor Wage Alliance, and so personal involvement in the process of making the history of the Dindigul Agreement. And it also would be great to have some updates with all our audience about the 1.5 years of the implementation and achievements and challenges that you have. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Actually, we've prepared a presentation to share, to kind of give some visual representation to what we'll discuss today. And thank you for having us here. We really appreciate the effort from the GLU in putting this workshop together. So I think you can go to full screen or to presentation mode. It might be easier for people to see on the first slide. Can you put it into the slideshow mode? Or if not, that's also fine. But if you could go back to the first slide. Thank you. So, so the Dindigul Agreement to eliminate GBVH, or gender-based violence and harassment. So this is the first enforceable and binding agreement to address GBVH, caste-based violence, and freedom of association in the Asian garment and textile industry. You will see the photos on the screen. This is capturing Jesri, a young woman who was raped and murdered by her supervisor in 2021, and the surrounding photos around the campaign that, to win this agreement that we can hopefully discuss after the presentation. Next slide, please. So what is the Dindigul Agreement? So it's an enforceable supply chain agreement with multi-party signatories. So, the enforceable part, meaning that it is legally binding and subject to arbitration in the brand's home country. which, as you all are aware, is a very important aspect because until now, the codes of conduct, which are voluntary, and the lack of global regulation have really failed to improve working conditions for workers. And who are the multi-parties of this agreement is the trade union, TTCU, Tamil Nadu Textile and Common Labor Union. They are an independent Dalit women-led trade union founded in 2013. They represent over 11,000 workers in Tamil Nadu, and 80% of those members are from the textile and garment industry. And they really use a community-based organizing model. Also, the regional and global labor organizations. So Asia Floor Wage Alliance, which myself and Aparna are coming from. So we are an Asian labor-led global labor and social alliance across garment-producing countries in Asia. We were founded in 2007, and we also work closely with consumer regions in USA and Europe, and as well as GLJ ILRF, Global Labor Justice International Labor Rights Forum. And they work to really hold global corporations accountable for labor rights violations in their supply chains and really advance laws and policies to protect decent work and strengthen freedom of association. And then the garment supplier, Eastman Exports, is a signatory of the agreement, as well as the fashion brands H&M, Gap, and PVH. You can go to the next slide. Yes. So the Dindigul Agreement relies on national and international labor standards and best practices. So ILO labor standards, ILO C-190 on gender-based violence and harassment, and C-87 and 98 on freedom of association, as well as the OECD guidelines. It also strengthens the POSH Act, which is the national law of India on prevention of sexual harassment, which we will discuss more on how this agreement actually strengthens the national law. And also best practices from unions and women's group included in the Safe Circle training, which is an approach to GBVH that was designed and co-created by women leaders who are members of AFWA. And this is really a strategy that builds women's leadership at production lines, inside factories, and really integrates unionization and freedom of association as well. Next slide. So when we talk about the Dindigul Agreement, we're actually talking about two interlocking agreements. So the first is the Supplier Trade Union Agreement, which is much like a CBA. So that is between TTCU and Eastman, and AFWA and GLJ ILRF are the witness signatories. And then the second agreement is the Brand and Labor Stakeholders Agreement. And the Labor Stakeholders Agreement, again, are the union, TTCU, AFWA, and GLJ. And the brands are H&M, Gap, and PVH. And the Brand Labor Stakeholder Agreement really sort of backs and strengthens the Supplier Trade Union Agreement. So the duration of the Dindigul Agreement is for 3 years with the ability to renew. And the scope is covering up to 5,000 workers from 2 garment units, 2 spinning mills, 1 printing unit, a training center, the women's hostel where many of the migrant women workers are living. And the funding is coming from Eastman, and also the brands, the vast majority is coming from the brands based on mutual agreement. Next slide. Okay, so the Brands and Labor Stakeholder Agreement. So the main components of this are a shared statement of principles about GBVH, highlighting C-190 and OECD principles as well. The development of the Oversight Committee, which is the main governing body of the agreement. And it's composed of representatives from the brands, from AFWA, from GLJ ILRF, from TTCU, as well as Eastman. And it also contains financial commitments from the brands. And it also importantly points to brands' use of purchasing practices to leverage the supplier to make sure that they're in compliance of the program as needed. Next slide, please. Okay, so the real meat of the Dindigul Agreement is the TTCU Eastman Agreement, and this really outlines the anti-GBVH program. So what this includes is worker and union-led training. So the union trains up all managers, supervisors, workers, worker leaders throughout the program. There's also the worker shop floor monitor system using the AFWA Safe Circle approach. So basically, these shop floor monitors are the front line of the remediation process. They are worker leaders that are hand-selected and trained up by the union to monitor each production line. And this is also the core of the Safe Circle approach. And the amendment of Eastman's internal policies to include global labor standards, so recognizing the ILO C-190 definition of GBVH. Next slide, please. And so union management dialogue, so this occurs regularly every week to address and resolve shop floor issues reported by workers or shop floor monitors. And anti-retaliation protection. So we know that, you know, a major hindrance to successful remediation is that, you know, essentially workers are retaliated against. So there's this culture of fear that, oh, I can't report what's happening to me because I might get fired, or, you know, the harassment might get worse. So there are additional protections against retaliation, and particularly for shop floor monitors, they have heightened protections under the agreement against retaliation. And there are additional protections from caste and migration status-based discrimination. So recognizing, you know, the intersectional oppressions from caste-based discrimination and migration status. So extra protections are included in the agreement as well. Next slide. Okay, and multi-layered grievance mechanism. So this really so this includes the shop floor monitor system, like I said, which are really the front line of remediation. It also builds on and strengthens the POSH Act's ICCs, the internal complaints committees, which are mandated under the POSH Act, that, you know, every workplace has these complaints committees. Prior to this agreement, the ICCs were basically non-functioning or not functioning well. So they have been reconstituted with workers that are hand selected by the union. And it also includes a new grievance mechanism. Oh, sorry, am I audible? Yes, okay. All right, I will continue. So in addition to strengthening the ICCs under the POSH Act, the Dindigul Agreement adds a new independent grievance mechanism with business consequences. So basically, each ICC has a sitting member that is an independent member who is a gender expert, and they have... Okay, I was muted again. I hope I'm audible. Yes, okay. So these independent assessors have the ability to do independent investigations and make recommendations. And if the company fails to comply, then this basically triggers the business consequences under the agreement itself. So that was a very kind of quick rundown of the program, and we are happy to discuss more in the later session. But now I will pass to my sister Aparna, who will speak more about what we have learned in 1.5 years of implementing this agreement. Thanks.
Hi all, thanks Ashley for the intro, and I will just start this presentation by reading out few quotes from the workers who are from Eastman Exports. Amarjyoti, a garment worker from Eastman Exports, says, I was one of the first women who used the grievance redressal mechanism of the Dindigul Agreement to report gender-based violence. And I did that because I believed for the first time in my life, I might receive justice. Secondly, Nadia, shop floor monitor from Eastman. From the woman who has scared to look at the face of my manager, I have today become unafraid to look into the manager's eyes boldly and speak about our issues. So, while I and both of us explain more about the Dindigul Agreement, we would really wanted to stress on the point that there was a culture of fear and silence, as any other garment factories in Asia, in Eastman also. And after this agreement, women are confident enough to come forward and file case or file the grievances that are happening on the shop floor, which really shows that how the Dindigul Agreement is now actually bringing justice to the garment workers. Next slide. So here in this slide, I would like to explain the overall impact that agreement has made within the factory and in the lives of the workers. So first of all, the agreement has improved workers' trust and confidence in the management. So now after the agreement, we can see more confidence and ability from the side of women to come forward and speak up and even collaborate with the management. Before, it was all about, as I told earlier, fear of retaliation, and they even didn't trust the mechanisms that were already available in the factory or provided by the management. Secondly, progressive cultural transformation of management across all levels. Before the agreement, the attitude of supervisors or the management towards workers were especially so abusive, and also since many of the women are representing the different levels of communities, there was even discrimination based on caste and gender, and this has changed dramatically. And now after the agreement, we can see supervisors and management who are ready to hear women, their issues, and also ready to treat women with respect. Third impact is social dialogue is actualized. This is one of the very amazing factor about the Dindigul Agreement, because through this agreement, now TTCU, the trade union or the labor stakeholders, are actually able to sit on a table and discuss what are the real issues in the factory. And every week, TTCU do a visit to the factory, and they actually do weekly remediation meetings where the union and the company together come to resolve any issues against women workers. Fourthly, good jobs that promote equity, development, and democracy. So the working environment has changed a lot. Now we can see there is constructive dialogue, like openness to constructive dialogue, and fewer conflicts. There also we can see positive transformation of work culture that actually led to increased employee retention, so that skilled labor can be maintained and workers feel safer and more confident at work. In addition to that, other major point I would like to stress here is that the Dindigul Agreement is building women leadership and tackles harmful social practices like caste discrimination. As Ashley has pointed out about the shop floor monitor, who plays a crucial role under this agreement. These are the leaders who are selected from each production line, women leaders, and they are called shop floor monitors. Through them, they actually nowadays resolve issues at their shop floor by engaging with their co-workers and having direct dialogue with the management. And if there are any issues that cannot be directly solved by the shop floor monitor, they take the initiative to take it up to the higher management as well as the union for further discussion and dialogue. And next is eliminates conditions for forced labor, which can provide protection and protection from import bans. So actually this has elimination or eliminates the condition for forced labor is actually recognized by the US Secretary of Homeland Security and others in US government, that the Dindigul Agreement as a best practice to eliminate conditions for forced labor. Good for business and worker well-being. So that's another which I can easily explain in detail in the coming slides, how the Dindigul Agreement has really helped the business for Eastman and the brands. Then next one is improves overall compliance of factory to national laws and global standards. Next slide. Remediation of grievances. This the numbers given here is based on the 1-year report that we published this year on Dindigul Agreement's implementation, and the report actually shows that 185 grievances were raised by women, of which 95 were raised by women workers, and out of 185, 182 were resolved, which means 98% of the grievances were resolved, and 163 grievances were resolved in a week. And this year also, as a person working closely with the implementation team, I could see there are more women coming forward confidently to report grievances at the shop floor. And as the graph shows, the lack of access to basic amenities were the major type of grievances that women came up and filed with either through the management or TTCU, and number of GBVH were 23. And this year's report, when I go through, I could see that how much the GBVH issues have decreased within the factory. And also I would also like to stress a point that when more cases more cases are filed, it really shows that how empowering this agreement is, because more workers are courageous enough to come forward and file the cases than previous to the agreement, where they were really fearful about the retaliation. And also this also shows that it is not just GBVH cases that they are filing grievances reported. The reported menial grievances like lack of basic amenities are also even reported by the women workers to the management or to the TTCU through this agreement. Next slide. Yeah, this is more data regarding how agreement has helped to build good business. First of all, 16% there is an increase in worker efficiency through the agreement, and there is also after the agreement there is a decrease in attrition rate, and 4.3% of increase in reporting to work on time, and 15% decrease in GMD rejection. Next slide. So another major benefit of this agreement is of building mature industrial relations, and the use of GBVH escalation ladder combined with a multi-layered bottom-up grievance redressal mechanism actually created a mature industrial relation. To further tell about this, we can see that the Dindigul Agreement has created a culture of labor rights recognition and improved workplace conditions rooted in freedom of association, dialogue, and collective bargaining. As I told, now labor stakeholders, especially TTCU, the trade union, can directly approach the management if there is any kind of issues that reported by the workers within the factory. Also, we can see there is low level of misunderstanding between the employer and employee, and this is mediated by trade union. Also, this has created a cooperation and mutual assistance between workers and management, and this has enabled increased productivity. Yeah, next slide. So these are few quotes from TTCU leaders as well as Eastman experts telling how the Dindigul Agreement has really changed the working culture within the factory. The TTCU leader, General Secretary Jiva, says a lot of times big issues arise when the small misunderstandings between management members and workers are not resolved immediately. This is what we try to address through our weekly meetings with the management. Divya, the state president of TTCU, says transparent conversations are happening between management and workers, and I can see that workers' willingness to work for this factory and their confidence and trust in management has improved. Now, the HR manager of the Eastman Exports testifies that we are now always open to constructive feedback and suggestions from the union and the workers. We can see this has improved workers' trust in us and has reduced job attrition and increased work efficiency. Next slide. So this is the last slide. Here are some quotes from the US government recognizing the Dindigul Agreement as a best practice to prevent GBVH at the shop floor. That's all. Thank you. If you have any questions, you can ask.
Thanks a lot, Ashley and Aparna. Excellent and very insightful presentation about the work you have done. Thanks a lot. Maybe we have any audience who have a question, please post a question on the chat box. Maybe could you also explain a little bit about the background leading up to the Dindigul Agreement and the involvement during the presentation and the preparation and the implementation of the agreement, and would it be applied and recommend to other sectors to use this to have such an agreement in the global supply chains outside the clothing and fabric and textile sector? Because the agreement is more for at the moment for clothing, fabric and textile sector. Please share with us. Yeah.
So I can start us off, but Aparna, please jump in and add. So as I mentioned, the Dindigul Agreement came about as a result of a year-long campaign called the Justice for Jayashree campaign. And Jayashree was a young woman who was also an organizer for TTCU at Nachi Apparel at Eastman. So in around 2018, I think TTCU had started organizing at Nachi. And then it was in January 2021 where Jayashree was murdered by her supervisor, and there was a case filed against members of the community. Basically, there was a lot of trying to deflect that it was actually an issue to do with production practices. So in 2021, the Justice for Jayashree campaign launched, and a letter of more than 90 international trade unions and women's groups calling for these brands to sign the EBA was launched. And in February and March, the Justice for Jayashree campaign was actually covered by The Guardian. So that's a bit about the campaign timeline. Later that year, there was a compensation that was mutually agreeable to the family that was reached for Jayashree's family. And then there was an independent investigation at Nachi. We also held a global vigil for Jayashree, and then there was a report done by WRC that was handed to the labor stakeholders, also to Eastman Exports and the brands, and then negotiations started that August towards an EBA. And then in April 2022 was when this landmark agreement was actually signed. Oh, and before that, there was also a speaking tour in the US for Justice for Jayashree. So it was a massive undertaking, and it was really, an impressive thing, which a Global South organization, a union in Tamil Nadu, and GLJ ILRF in the US. It was very much this North-South collaboration that was very much, it was based on empathy and collaboration. It was, this very sort of special thing that was not transactional at all, I don't know if Aparna, if you want to add anything to that, just kind of the story of the campaign. There's a lot to say there, but I'm trying to be a little bit succinct.
Yeah, whatever Ashley said is true, and it's all about global solidarity that we could really experience throughout those days, where global North and global South organizations coming together and working towards to achieve. And uh, years long we have fought to stop GBVH at the factory, and at the end, this was really a remarkable agreement that we could finally achieve. As a result of global solidarity, I would say. Yeah.
And I think the other part of the question is, is something like this replicable to other industries? I mean, we think yes, absolutely. I mean, I think, that is the ultimate idea. I mean, this is a global supply chain intervention. And this is the way production is organized, all around the world. So I think that, we think that in any industry, this could be applicable, absolutely.
Yeah.
And we'd be happy to share those experiences. Yeah, Aparna, please.
Sure. Also, the scope of this agreement is not just the factory, inside the factory. It also includes hostels of the workers, the transportation in and outside the factory until they are taken to their homes. So all these are also covered under this agreement. It's not just the shop floor itself. Yeah.
Thanks a lot. We also have a question from Rajesh Wari. Would you like to raise the question yourself? He already posted the question in the chat box. I could also have to read it. Good presentation from both presenters. I just would like to know what kind of caste-based violence occurred and how they solve it. And the second question is, what is the ratio of female in the leadership management, like supervisor in those textile industries? And the third question is there any engagement in filing cases with OECD countries opposed as far as the textile industry concerned? Please, Aparna and Ashley, you might both answer the Rajeshwari's questions.
Yeah, so Jayashree represents the Dalit community, and she was a Dalit woman worker. And the similar kind of violences and abuses we really see towards this, like caste discrimination, we call basically, and it's very prevalent in India in different forms. And this agreement also covers discrimination against caste is also as a grievance. So any kind of caste discrimination within the factory floor can also be reported by the worker or the women workers under this as a violation of this agreement, actually. And the ratio of female in the leadership or management. So 90% or 95% of the supervisors within the shop floor are men, and female leadership that's the change that we made here. The shop floor monitors, who are the leaders identified by the trade union in each factory, in each production line. So if there are around 1,200 workers, per 20 workers there will be one shop floor leader, and these are women workers identified by the TTCU, and these all are union leaders. So they actually represents, or they are the leaders now within the factory, who actually helps or supports the co-workers and identify their issues, take it up to the management as well as the trade union for resolving their issue. And yeah, I think I covered. Ashley, do you want to add?
No, I think you covered it. I think for the second question about OECD, specifically around gender-based violence and harassment, AFWA has not filed any cases with OECD country contact points around gender-based violence and harassment.
Yeah, and maybe I can add, through this agreement, we are actually, what really happening is that most of the cases we could see resolved within the shop floor by the management and TTCU. There is even only 1 or 2 cases we could even take it to the next level to a committee called Internal Complaints Committee. All other cases were resolved within the factory itself. And as Ashley told, we have done any OECD complaints. We mainly currently working on the waste theft issues that we actually complained through OECD system. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Also, thank you, Rawiswari, for the questions. Yes, Adlira, please go ahead. You have a question.
Yes, thank you very much for the very interesting presentation. I'm a bit more interested on this sort of whatever you call it, structures that you have created, or sorts of agreements that you have created. So you had this quasi-collective bargaining agreement in between the union and the company, but then when it came to this brand labor stakeholder agreement, the company is not included there, I understand. It's only the brand and these labor support organizations. So what's the rationale in between these layers of negotiating, or I don't know what you call it, what's the proper language? And the second one I have is, have any of the global unions been involved at some point in this negotiations or discussions, or have they asked, have they shown any interest, in the kind of the model you have developed, which seems to be very sophisticated? And yeah, thank you.
So yeah, I can try to explain the rationale behind the two agreements. So, of course, it's important for the union to win that agreement with the supplier, with the company, like the collective bargaining agreement, for that show of power. And the brands, have the commercial relationship with the supplier. So the rationale of having a brand agreement with just the labor stakeholders is to really reinforce that agreement that the union has with the supplier. So it's basically, it's saying that, the brand has agreed with the union, with the labor stakeholders, that they will impose business consequences on the supplier if they do not comply with this anti-GBVH agreement that is outlined in the TTCU Eastern Agreement. I hope that makes sense. And then in terms of, are others interested? I mean, yes, AFWA has many member unions, and we are discussing, how do we replicate this? How do we make it fit to other contexts? I mean, it's all in discussion. One thing that we are sure is that we cannot wait for another tragedy to occur for something, like this to come about. So we are definitely in discussion, and also negotiation with other brands as well. Brands have shown interest, international organizations have shown interest. So, we are in ongoing discussions with many different parties. Yeah.
Thanks a lot for the questions and also for the answers from our experts. We also have collected some pre-workshops questions from our participants in the MOOC. We have a question from Hannah Meksigwa. Sorry if I spelled the name not correctly. Is the Dindigul Agreement an international framework? The second question is from PK Nepon. What are the most appropriate ways of the problem of sexual gender-based violence could be addressed? And the third question is from Kim Seung Sreng. I think he's from Cambodia. How is this agreement transferable and can serve as model to other countries in the region? Maybe that's the question that you already mentioned a little bit before. There's still two other questions, but maybe I stop here first, and then you can have the remarks on these questions and on the answers.
So the question about international framework, I hope I understood it correctly, but so it's a global supply chain agreement, and it sort of fills a gap where global regulation doesn't really exist, and it really emphasizes human rights due diligence. So it's, you know, in that way, in that sense, it is. I hope I answered that question, if that was what was intended by international framework. But it certainly does, you know, it has multi-parties that are based in the, you know, the consumer countries or the brand home countries, as well as the producer countries in Asia.
Yeah. Also, Ashley had already explained the agreement includes definitions and best practices from ILO, ILO standards and ILO 1C 190, C87. Also, National Law of India basically strengthens workplace committees required, like the POSH Act, which is actually it's also the agreement also follows that and empowers the internal complaints committee, which is mandatory in every factory. So here also we empowers through this agreement. It actually empowers it again. Also, it also mentions the best practices from unions and workers, women's groups included in the safe circles training and women's empowerment workshops. Yeah, so it actually includes all definitions and best practices from international labor standards to the unions level and Indian law. Yeah, it's a mixture.
Thank you very much. We still have two questions from the audience. The first question is caste? I think this question is for Aparna. Is caste still a factor in economic sphere of India? Could you hear me?
Is
Yes.
the caste system still
a factor in economic sphere of India? So
yes, of course. It happens. It is still prevalent and in different forms. Just for example, in Dindigul, there was even issues where women workers complained that the Dalit women were asked to sit on the floor of the bus while they were traveling, or they were not. Even still, there are within the villages, when we go into the villages of not just Tamil Nadu, other states of India, we could see like same upper caste wells cannot be accessed, water cannot be accessed by the Dalit communities. Even there are schools where high rate of Dalit dropouts are seen because they are one or the other way discriminated in their classrooms by the teachers or the course students. So this is not just a workplace, which actually the society's this kind of discrimination actually reflects within the workplace also. So it's still prevalent in India. Yeah.
We have Edlira. I think Edlira, you raised your hand maybe.
No, perhaps Ruben. I already
yes.
spoke, so perhaps
Yes, we have Ruben. Please, would you like to raise the question yourself, Ruben?
Yeah. So yes, Ruben, it's already addressed by Ashley in the chat, right?
Yes.
Agreement actually covers spinning mill, printing, and training center, office student. Yeah, it's not just apparel. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we come to the next questions also, because you know, Asian floor wage alliance historic cross-border living wage formulation of Asian garment workers is also the only woman-centered formulation for Asian garment work formulation that takes into account unpaid care work. Because I remember Ashley in last year's conference, she's also mentioned that you use the first time, you are the first organization on the first time using the care work which is calculated in the living wage. I mean, I think it's very amazing the way you do it, and taken into account unpaid care cost. So Asian Foreign Wage Alliance also build leadership of women garments workers to lead struggle for decent work at national and international levels, and also you committed to an expansion notion of employment relationship that includes home worker, and home worker is also one of the big topic that we mentioned in our MOOC. So the question is, in countries and regions and sectors of the global supply chains which are not covered by the Dindigul or covered by such an agreement, like during the Dindigul, good living wage is one of the tools for trade unions to be processed to. So the questions are for both of you, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really great question. I think I would just start by mentioning that in ILO C-190, they have mentioned economic harm as a form of gender-based violence, which I think is, a really important point. And yes, I mean, we saw how the lack of living wages in the garment industry, I mean, in every industry really, escalated just a massive humanitarian crisis during the pandemic. And people really didn't have the, any sort of savings to tide themselves over, even if, they were not able to work for 1 month, because in the garment industry, as we know, many brands reduced orders during that time. And, so we think that, of course, and also in the garment industry, the majority of workers are women, and also a majority are supporting their family with that wage. So, absolutely, it is very, very important for gender justice, and also it's very closely linked to gender-based violence and harassment as well. So living wage is extremely important. Aparna, did you want to add?
No, you have covered it. Yeah.
Great. Any other question from the audience? Alira, please go ahead. Yeah.
I wanted to know a bit about the purchasing practice that you made reference, that the agreement even includes some implication for purchasing practices, which is, I think that has been the major bottleneck in any sort of agreements with the brands. So can you give us an example of when there has been any change on purchasing practices in relation to this agreement? And what does that, what form has that taken? I mean, in financial terms in particular.
So I can say, I mean, the idea is that the supplier would be incentivized for compliance, and then the disincentivization is there, but it's like a last resort. We don't want that option to be used. We want good, sustainable jobs in the industry. It hasn't been thankfully enacted yet. Eastman has been compliant, and we are off 1.5 years of negotiation. So I think we'll absolutely pursue that going forward, taking into account that globally the industry is not in a very good place with the economic situation, but we will pursue that absolutely.
Aparna, would you like to add something on?
No, Ashley has covered it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, there's some exchange from GIF. Yeah. She has bad connections, but she wants to know the extent of which the agreement is being complied with. And also, are there any incidences of violence in which the agreement was used as a reference?
So I did not get that second.
Are there any incidences of violence in which the agreement was used as a reference? That's a 2 question from GIF. Thanks. Back to
Ashley,
you,
do you
Aparna.
want to?
Yeah.
Sure. So I mean, Eastman has been extremely compliant with the agreement, and you know, the regular union management dialogue meetings have really, you know, enabled that, as well as regular meetings with the shop floor monitors. So, you know, Eastman has been very compliant with the agreement. Any incidences of violations in which the agreement was used, I think Aparna had explained. So there were in the first year, I think 185 grievances that were raised. And I want to state the importance of this, because if you see a factory where there are 0 grievances, it is a massive red flag. It means that people are too afraid to report. It means that retaliation is high, that, you know, threats and intimidation are there, and there is definitely gender-based violence happening. So the fact that there were many grievances raised, particularly in the initial months, really showed that people were, you know, that the retaliation had been eliminated, that people were not afraid, and that they could actually trust in these processes. And we've recently released, so the answer is yes, there's been 185 grievances to different levels, as there was also a graph that Aparna had shared, that the majority were, you know, like basic amenities, and then I think something around 23 cases of gender-based violence. And this is, of course, a range of behaviors. This means, you know, this could be something like verbal harassment, or, you know, there's like a very wide spectrum of behaviors that we consider to be gender-based violence and harassment. But we had recently released the 1-year report of implementation of the agreement. And actually, if you look at the annex there, you can see the agreement between TTCU and Eastman. And there you'll see a list of the violations and their and the remedies as well. So if you're curious to see how an incident of GBVH would be handled according to the agreement, then definitely take a look at that report.
Yeah, so to elaborate how these cases are reported. So workers are now, it was just workers usually used to report it to the TTCU alone. So now they are free enough to come and report it to the welfare officer or with the management. And second level, they now also do it with TTCU. And thirdly, under the program team of the Dindigul Agreement, we have to do documentation officers who actually visits factory once or twice in a week, and to them also they directly come and report. And it's not just GBVS issues, as Ashley told, it also includes different types of issues at the factory. If there is no water, or no proper like maybe issues with the hostelers, they are not allowed to leave the hostel premises after a point of time. So all these issues are coming to the factory or to the union, which actually both of them together sit and resolve. So that's how it is happening, the grievance mechanism. Yeah.
Edlira, please go ahead.
Yeah, sorry for the too many questions. I'm just wondering, I mean, in a way, this is an agreement that is a very empowering agreement, removing also some sources of vulnerability for workers, for them to be unionized or be active in the union. So I wanted to know, have you observed any spillover effects on, you know, on the union life, if you like, but also on the quality of the collective bargaining agreements? And on that, I wanted to know, is there a separate collective bargaining agreement for wages and other things, and a separate for this one, or are the two merged? So what are the modalities of that? Thank you.
Yeah, Aparna, did you want to? You're on mute.
Yeah, I'll continue. You can just start. Yeah.
Okay. So so basically everything is solved in almost everything is resolved in the weekly meetings between management and the union. So, you know, all sorts of different grievances come up. I would say I would have to defer to Aparna about all sorts, you know, what sorts of grievances those are. I mean, sure, there's things about payments and smaller grievances. there's a range, but the regular social dialogue that's happening, I think, is, you know, the majority, I think it was over 90% of cases are resolved during those meetings in the first instance.
Yeah. And also the types of issues might be like, which also includes the health and safety issues or any kind of discrimination based on caste or social security issues. That's a lot because we have PF and Provident Fund, all these schemes given by the government to the workers, which might not be able to access easily, which actually all the factories are mandated to do all these, give all these access and facilities to the workers. So workers started coming and complaining or reporting it to the management or the unions. So that's there. And this agreement is basically one mainly focus on the GBVH alone. It's not a living wage agreement or nothing. It's basically a GBVH prevention agreement. Yeah, but through this, any kind of economic harm or any kind of harm that women workers are facing in terms of wages, in terms of caste, in terms of their gender, all these are actually falls under the scope of the agreement also. Yeah.
Thanks a lot. We're going to come to the conclusion. Would you like to give us some remarks on the way forward? What's the plan and which principle that you need to nail on in order to keep the implementation successful of the Dindigul Agreement successful? What's the plan in the next years?
Yeah, so the aspiring or what as labor stakeholders, we really desire to expand this agreement to other facilities of Eastman as well as in other supplier factories, not just India, in other countries, garment producing countries. Few of the brands turn to be interested. We are working on ground, preparing the ground for that. And if that happens, it will be really a revolution within the garment industry of Asia. Yeah. Ashley.
It's difficult to, you know, I mean, that was really well said, Aparna. I would just say, I mean, you know, brands really need to use their leverage to enforce compliance and to make sure that, you know, that their supplier factories are free of gender-based violence and harassment. That's what I would say.
Thanks a lot.